Healing didn't arrive as a lightning bolt of realization. There was no sudden moment of clarity where all the pain disappeared. It came quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the tiny, consistent choices I made each day. The first step was unfollowing him on social media. It felt like a betrayal at first, like I was erasing the history we shared. But it was also an act of self-preservation. Each post, each story, each reminder of what was no longer mine became less sharp when I allowed myself to step back. Returning to my routines became another anchor. Mornings I had spent waiting for messages were now filled with small rituals. Brewing coffee, journaling, reading. I discovered that the ordinary, mundane rhythms of life could be grounding, even healing, when approached with intention. I began reconnecting with friends who had remained patient and steady throughout the turmoil. Their presence reminded me that life continued beyond heartbreak, that laughter and shared experiences were still possible. I had neglected these connections for so long, prioritizing the emotional needs of someone who no longer existed in my life. Reclaiming time for myself was revolutionary. I allowed myself to read books I loved, to go for walks without guilt, to explore hobbies I had abandoned. Each choice felt like a small victory, a statement that my life and my needs mattered as much as anyone else's. I learned to sit with silence without fear. The quiet moments, once filled with longing and anxiety, became spaces for reflection. I could observe my emotions without being overwhelmed, gradually learning that grief is not a storm to survive, but a current to navigate. Therapy became another crucial tool. Speaking with someone who could listen without judgment allowed me to untangle the knots of confusion and misplaced responsibility. I began to recognize the patterns in my relationships, the ways I had overextended, and the lessons embedded in the heartbreak itself. I discovered the importance of self-compassion. For too long, I had judged myself for feeling too much, caring too much, and hoping too much. Now I realized that these were strengths, not flaws. The capacity to feel deeply is a gift, not a burden. The first night I slept through without obsessing over what had been lost felt miraculous. I woke up without the crushing weight of absence pressing down. It was proof that even in heartbreak, small moments of peace are possible, and they are the building blocks of recovery. I began to write daily, not as a record of grief, but as a declaration of survival. Journaling allowed me to articulate what I could not say aloud, to validate my own experience, and to track progress I had not noticed in the moment. Words became medicine. I learned that healing is non-linear. Some days were filled with joy and energy. Others were dark and heavy. Accepting this ebb and flow allowed me to be patient with myself, to resist the urge to speed up recovery, and to honor the natural rhythm of grief. The act of choosing myself became a radical declaration. I realized that prioritizing my needs was not selfish, but necessary for survival. Self-care was no longer a luxury. It was a lifeline, a recognition that my heart deserved the same attention I had once given to another. I began to understand the difference between love and attachment. My heartbreak had been intensified by clinging to a version of love that was no longer present. Learning to release attachment, to hold memories without being bound by them, was an essential step in regaining freedom. Boundaries became a central theme. I learned to define what was acceptable for my emotional space, to protect myself from harm, and to honor my own limits. Without boundaries, I realized, love can become dangerous, a force that consumes rather than nurtures. I noticed subtle shifts in my self-perception. I no longer felt like a passive participant in my life, waiting for validation or affection from someone else. I began to see myself as the architect of my own emotional well-being, capable of cultivating happiness independent of external circumstances. Gratitude emerged unexpectedly. I started appreciating the lessons heartbreak had offered: resilience, awareness, empathy, and strength. Pain, I realized, could coexist with gratitude. One did not erase the other. Together, they became a complex mosaic of growth. I reconnected with the world around me. Simple pleasures, a warm cup of tea, a quiet sunrise, laughter with friends reminded me that joy could exist outside of romantic love. Life had richness and depth I had ignored in the obsession with another person. Forgiveness became a tool for liberation. Not necessarily forgiveness of him, but forgiveness of myself for staying too long, for overextending, for believing that love required erasure of my own identity. Forgiveness allowed me to move forward without resentment weighing me down. I began to envision a future without him, a future where love could exist without sacrifice of self. Imagining new possibilities restored hope, reminding me that heartbreak, while painful, does not define the entirety of life or limit the capacity for future connection. The process taught me patience. Healing is not instant, it is cumulative. Each small act of self-care, each choice to honor my emotions, each step toward independence added up, eventually creating a foundation strong enough to withstand residual pain. I noticed that my relationships with others improved as well. Friends and family saw a version of me emerging that was calmer, more self-aware, and more emotionally balanced. I could engage without losing myself, communicate without fear, and love without overextending. The journey also revealed the universality of heartbreak. Talking with friends, reading stories online, and observing others' experiences highlighted that my pain was part of a larger human condition. Many people navigate love, loss, and recovery without guidance, silently enduring struggles that deserve recognition. I began to reflect on the cultural and societal forces at play. Social norms often glorify endurance, silence emotional pain, and equate loyalty with suffering. Recognizing these forces allowed me to separate personal experience from systemic pressures, to understand that heartbreak is rarely just an individual failure. I discovered the power of storytelling. Sharing my experience, even in small circles, created connection and empathy. Others responded with recognition and support, validating that my journey was not isolated. Stories have the capacity to heal, to normalize, and to inspire action. I realized that love for oneself is not a substitute for love of others, but a prerequisite. Only when I learned to honor my own heart could I engage in relationships without losing myself, without mistaking chaos for connection. The 3 life lessons crystallized. You can love someone deeply and still lose yourself if you stop listening to your own needs. Heartbreak is not proof of failure but evidence of your capacity to feel. And choosing yourself is not selfish, it is survival. These truths became the compass guiding me forward. I began to embrace solitude not as loneliness, but as a space for reflection, growth, and empowerment. Solitude offered perspective, the chance to understand my emotional patterns, and the freedom to rebuild identity unbound from past attachments. The quiet moments became sacred. A walk in the park, a moment of stillness, or simply breathing without judgment offered healing beyond words. I learned that peace is not the absence of pain, but the presence of self-awareness and acceptance. Finally, recognize that healing is a journey with no fixed endpoint. It is iterative, ongoing, and deeply personal. There will always be echoes of the past, but they need not define the present or future. Choosing oneself, cultivating boundaries, and practicing self-compassion are practices, not destinations. I began to wonder how many people are walking around with silent wounds, shaped by relationships they were never taught to navigate. My story is just one of countless experiences, a reflection of both personal and systemic challenges that shape emotional life. If my story teaches anything, it is this: healing begins the moment you decide to treat your heart with the same kindness you've given to others. Sharing our stories, acknowledging pain, and embracing recovery are acts of courage that ripple beyond the self. And maybe, just maybe, by voicing our experiences, by validating our own hearts, we give someone else the permission to begin their own journey. Healing is not solitary, it is a chain of connection, empathy, and self-discovery that reminds us of our capacity to endure, grow, and love again.